There are some things that are just natural about being a human. Those things that just make us who we are, that make us uniquely human. And while we have these qualities and these characteristics that separate us from the animal kingdom, there is something we share. Many things, in fact, but one very important thing that we share with all living things. And that is something that we're going to be talking about a lot in the next couple of weeks, a word that's going to be very important for our series of lessons, and that's the word instinct. And instinct is something that we just naturally do. It's not necessarily something that we're learned or something that we're taught or something that we give logical, sequential, rational thought to. It's an instinct. It's just what we naturally do. And in the animal kingdom, animals have instincts. We, as part of the living animal kingdom on this planet, have some things that we naturally, instinctively do. And whether you're talking about a human or a wolf or a fox or a bird, the instinct for self-preservation is exceptionally hardwired. It's part of the very essence of who we are. There are very few things, if there is anything at all, that are more important to us than the idea of self-preservation, of maintaining, of being safe, of being secure, of being sure of who we are and what we have, and protecting ourselves. The first instinct that we're going to be looking at in our series of lessons on instinct is save. Save. We have an instinct to save, to find security, to provide for our needs, to use a modern word, to hoard. As things get more and more difficult, as things get more and more unsure, the need for, the desire, the instinctive drive to have and to hold and to keep becomes more and more profound in our lives. It's true in news stories, it's true in reports. If you've been to the grocery store, you see the effects of this instinct played out in our lives. People are unsure, and so people are trying to provide. They're trying to, the word we use is hoard. You probably remember the story that was played out much to the chagrin of many of us. In fact, to all of us, some weeks ago, as this period of our life, this situation that we find ourselves in, this pandemic that is spreading across the planet, was just in its early stages. There were two brothers that had an idea of how they could capitalize on this. And so in a picture that's now very famous, these brothers were able to hoard together some 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer. They recognized that they may have a need, and they knew that everyone else would have a need. And so they saw this as an opportunity to capitalize on a situation and to recognize how they could gain from the natural instinctive process of hoarding and gathering and having for ourselves that people would inevitably start to do. Now, thankfully, those young men have come to their senses and have changed their ways. They've donated that, and it's become something that was beneficial to facilities that were in need. But it does tell us something about the natural instinct that we have to hoard. And truthfully, this isn't something that's particularly new. Many of us know people, love people that have been through the Great Depression. And one of the things that's characteristic of the generation that came through the Great Depression is this instinct to hoard. I remember my grandfather in his house before he passed. He had a very interesting house, and both my grandmother and my grandfather had separate bathrooms, which I always thought, what a great idea. I wish we had that. Separate bathrooms. And I remember that over the toilet, he had built a series of shelves that went all the way up to the ceiling. And my grandfather never failed to have rows and rows and rows of all the things that he might need. I remember that there was always 7 or 8 cans of shaving cream. There were always 10 or 12 bottles of deodorant and shampoo and bars of soap, and it was always stacked up. And he would say that goes back to an in-ground kind of hardwiring that he never was able to shake, coming through a time when he had nothing. Never wanted to be in that situation again. You see, this is instinctive, and this idea of hoarding and gathering up for ourselves is something that is hardwired into us. And yet what we're going to see through this is that Christ calls us to new instincts. He calls us to new ways of thinking, to new ways of operating, to new hardwiring as he transforms not only us emotionally and not only us spiritually, but he transforms us psychologically. He transforms the very way in which we interact with our world and the very way in which we think about our world. And one of the very important things that he transforms within us is this idea of why we have what we have and where we find our sense of security. A couple things that I want us to see about this is that, first of all, we have to recognize that there's a certain level of futility that comes from this idea of hoarding. Hoarding, I'm going to gather up, I'm going to have what I need, I'm going to protect myself, I'm going to secure my future by what I can possess. And Jesus says the very nature of this is futile. Notice what he says in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. He says, "Don't store up treasures on earth. Moth and rust will eat it away. Robbers will break in and they're going to steal it. No, you store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Moth and rust don't eat it away there, and no robbers break in and steal it. Show me your treasure, and I'll show you where your heart is." Something very interesting that he's doing here, and it's something that's very easy for us to miss, not having a familiarity with the Greek language. Let me nerd out just a moment and share something with you that I found to be just spectacularly interesting. These 3 words, moth, rust, and robber, denote very different kinds of ways that our security is taken from us. The first word there, the word moth, is a word that means destruction that occurs forcefully from nature. Destruction that occurs forcefully from nature. You see, the moth is going to come in and forcefully eat that cloth, that treasure that we've stored up. And it's the same kind of idea, it's the same kind of wording that might be used for the force of lightning that fells a tree, the force of the earthquake that rends the earth. These things, the natural world in which we live, this fallen planet, works in forceful ways against us. And it will be constantly jeopardizing our treasure. The things that we store up cannot be kept safe from the forces of nature around us. Secondly, there's just the natural degrading way in which our world is operating. We're in a world of entropy. We're in a world where things move from order to disorder. We're in a world where food spoils. We're in a world where things degrade, metals corrode. It's just the reality of the world in which we live, and there's nothing we can do to reverse the natural process that takes place here. You see, we can't keep the lightning from striking, the earth from rending, the moth from eating. We can't keep the ice from melting, the iron from rusting, and things from corroding. We can't help it. It's a futile proposition that we have no power against. And third, try as we might, we can't protect ourselves from the power of others. There are other people in this world, and underneath this fallen world in which we live, people are going to continually do things that take from us what we treasure up. The futility of trying to gain for ourselves treasures on earth. It's a temporary, at best, proposition. And Jesus points to us that it is a futile proposition that can't bring us true peace. Not only is it futile, second of all, it's actually dangerous. Because it makes within us a way of thinking. It brings about a mindset that is in and of itself a dangerous proposition for us, and one that we have to be careful of. Hoarding and saving gives us a false sense of security. The story that Jesus tells us in Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 15. "Watch out," he said to them, "and beware of all greed. Your life doesn't consist of the sum total of your possessions. We'll come back to that phrase in a moment. That's a great phrase. Your life doesn't consist of the sum total of your possessions. So he told them a parable. He said, there was a rich man whose land produced a fine harvest. What shall I do? He said to himself. I don't have enough room to store my crops. And he said to himself, I know what I'll do. I'll pull down my barns and I'll go build bigger ones. And then I'll be able to store all the corn and all my belongings there. And I shall say to my soul, soul, you've got many good things stored up for many years. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and have a good time. But God said to him, fool, this very night your soul will be demanded of you. Now who's going to have the things you've gotten ready? And that's how it will be for someone who stores up things for himself, but isn't rich before God. Notice a couple of things that he's doing here in this story and what he's revealing. And first of all, let me point out that I don't think he's saying here that having crops is bad, or even that having an abundance of crops is what's bad. I think the point of the story that he's bringing out here for us is that what's bad is the fact that this man has placed his trust in that. How does he know tomorrow and next week and the week after and the month after and the year after is going to be good? The reason he believes that is because his trust is placed in a harvest that's in a barn. That's where the trust is. And I think the point that Jesus is getting to is just that. When our life becomes the sum total of our possessions, then the sum total of our possessions are where we place our trust. That's where our treasure is. That's where our heart is placed, because it is that harvest in the barn that makes us hopeful and optimistic about tomorrow. And Jesus says, be careful about that. He's already said, the moth and the rust and the robber are going to come and they're going to take from you what you've stored. But here's the other side of that story. Sometimes we have to be aware that we can't protect what we have stored for us. The other side of the coin is we can't even guarantee that we will be here for what we have stored up. Who among us can be sure that tomorrow won't be our last? God said to this man, your soul is going to be required of you today. And try as we might, we have no guarantee that we will live to see tomorrow. How fruitless then are the barns and barns and barns of things stored up so that tomorrow will be provided for when we have no promise that we ourselves will even make it to tomorrow. You see, this is a futile way of finding security, and it leads to a dangerous way of thinking if we're not careful. Those things then lead us to an understanding that what we have before us here is a recognition of an old instinct. This is the natural way that we deal with uncertainty. We hoard and we gather, and we put things together so that we can be sure of tomorrow, the next week, and the next year. But this is futile, and this is dangerous, and out of this, Christ calls us to a greater instinct, a new instinct. The transformation that Christ pours into us and brings about in us is a transformation down to even the instinctual level of how we function in this world. And that's why this is such an important idea. This new command, this new instinct, changes the way we think about our possessions. Notice with me what he says in Luke chapter 6. In Luke chapter 6, Jesus begins to set the table for what this new instinct looks like and this new way of functioning looks like. And he says this, Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 34. If you lend only to people you expect to get things back from, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get paid back. No, love your enemies. Do good and lend without expecting anything in return. Then your reward will be great. And you, listen to this, you will be the children of the highest. He is generous, you see, even to the stingy and the wicked. That idea of you will be like the highest, you will be like God, is a very, very important concept. You see, what I'm going to suggest to you is this new instinct of generosity, of sharing, of looking for the needs of others and putting our trust in God instead of in what we can possess. This is actually a wonderful family trait. And in the same way that family traits can be demonstrated and stretched out throughout the years, and you can see characteristics of yourself that were in your father and your grandfather, your mother and your grandmother, one of the family traits of God's family, one of the characteristics that we see in our Father is generosity. And we see it right here. We will be like the children of the highest. We will be like He is when we act like He acts. And He is one who acts in generosity. Notice what it says in Matthew chapter 5. God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. You know, this is a really important thing, and it's something that we often miss, because what we have here is a semi-arid situation where farming and shepherding and having pasture land was such an important thing. And they needed the rain. It was an enormous gift. It was a blessing from God. But you know, the rain doesn't just fall on a field here and a field there. It doesn't just fall on a good pasture from a good farmer, a good shepherd, somebody who's following God, and here on these other fields where these people are not following God, no rain. No, that's not how it happens. God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. God causes the rain to fall on all the fields, on all the pastures. God, in a beautiful way, has blessed, irregardless of what kind of means and what kind of worth someone is deserving of. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 42, just a couple verses before this, Jesus says, "Give to anyone who asks of you. Don't refuse someone who wants to borrow from you." There's no qualifiers here. There's no strings attached. There's no preconditions that God gives. And in the same way, we should give like He gives, freely, lovingly, generously, as there is need. You see, that is a stark contrast to the world around us. That's a stark contrast to the instinct that is naturally within us. So this new instinct that God is bringing about in us, that transforming power of the Holy Spirit within us, Christ coming in to live in our hearts to make us new creations, brings about a trait that is seen first and foremost in our Father, and a trait that should be seen in His children, the trait of generosity. Two key ideas about generosity that I'll share with you. First of all, we're going to look at generosity in terms of our possessions. And why do we have possessions? What is the purpose for us having possessions? And secondly, how do we use possessions? So two things there we'll look at. First of all, why do we have it? Why do we have it? Let's look at something here. In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul writes to the early church at Ephesus, and he says in verse 28, "The thief shouldn't steal any longer, but should rather get on with some honest manual work, so as to be able to share with people in need." Well, the thief shouldn't steal because that's immoral, and that's not becoming of someone who is a follower of Christ. That's not someone who is trying to be like their Father who's in heaven. But not just that. He's not merely saying put away an immoral activity, but he's saying pursue a moral activity for this purpose. Pursue good, honest labor. Why? So that you can gain. Why? So that you can give. Why do we have what we have? Why is it that God has blessed us with what He's blessed us with? He's blessed us so that we can be a conduit of blessing, so that we can be a channel through which the blessings of God flow through us and into the lives of those who are needful of it. The entire purpose of getting resources, getting money, is so that we can then in turn provide for those who don't have the means to do it themselves. In Acts chapter 20, we read these words, "You yourself know that these very hands worked to serve my own needs and those of the people with me. I showed you in all such matters that this is how we should work." How should we work? This is how we should work. Read on. "To help the weak. Remembering the words of Jesus Christ as He put it, it is more blessed to give than to receive." This is why we have. This is why we have what we have. So that we might be a blessing to those who don't. Second, how do we use this? How do we use what we have wisely? You know, wise use of resources is a very important concept and something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and studying. And oftentimes when we think about the idea of wise use of our monetary resources, we use this word investment. an investment, a wise investment? Is that a good investment? Is that a profitable investment? One of my favorite writers had this brilliant statement, and I'll just give it to you as a quotation because I think it's just so true. In many ways, Jesus is serving as an investment advisor, encouraging us to diversify our portfolio by reinvesting our money in more lucrative ways, namely, in our ability and desire to give generously to those around us. That is a brilliant statement. And it really does give us an insight as to the idea of an investment. An investment. And so I ask you the question, is generosity a good investment? Well, we have to ask, what exactly makes a good investment? Not too long ago, the Fairmont Equities Group, a investment house, published an article, and in that article, they gave the 3 key considerations for determining whether or not something is a worthwhile investment. And here's what they said. A worthwhile investment is going to have an increasing profit. It's going to demonstrate good management, and it's going to revolve around a proven good product. So let me just ask you, if we go back and we take those qualifications of what makes for a good investment and apply generosity to those standards, how do we measure out? Well, let's see. First of all, is it an increasing profit? God ensures us that this is a safe investment. Nothing's going to damage this. And furthermore, not only is it not going to lose value, but that it will always appreciate. Notice here what we have in Malachi chapter 3. God says through the prophet, "Bring the entire tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and test me by this, please. Yahweh of armies has said, if I don't open the heavens floodgates and empty out a blessing upon you until there is no need." He says, I'm going to open up the floodgates. If you will give generously, if you will demonstrate the generosity that I have, you're going to see that I am going to alleviate the need that is around you. Now, it doesn't say everybody's going to have a portion in their garage. It doesn't offer everybody a summer home. What it says is there will be no need. I don't know about you, but we live in a world that I see continual and monumental need. And God said the key to removing need is developing generosity, because I will take what you give and make it an increasing profit against the need that people have. Paul writes to the church at Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 a very similar idea. And just notice some of these words that I'm going to put emphasis on as I read this. Chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians, starting in verse 10. The one who supplies seed to be sown and bread to eat. This, of course, is speaking of God. This one will supply and increase your seed and multiply the yield of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, in all single-hearted goodness, which is working through us to produce thanksgiving to the Lord. The service of this ministry, listen, will not only supply what God's people so badly need, but will overflow with thanksgivings to God. This is the thing that God promises. God promises an ever-increasing profit. And that is the first key for a good investment. Second key for a good investment is that it's under good management. That it's under good management, that the managers of this fund have a track record to be able to demonstrate that they know what they're doing. And the investments that we make in generosity will never fail, because they're handled by a God who's completely in control. We read in places like Job chapter 38, since your days began, you have ordered the morning and you have let dawn know its place. Amos says, he's the one who makes the Pleiades and the Orion. He turns deep darkness into dawn. He darkens the day into night. He's the one that calls the waters of the sea and pours out the face of the earth. Yahweh is his name. What he's saying here is every morning God wakes up the sun. God every morning sends it on its journey across the sky. God every evening sets it into the darkness of the night. God is in control. He is in charge of this universe. And he has the capacity. He has the ability. It's important to know a good manager has ability. But it's also important to know that a good manager has track record. God has a good track record. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, have a good look at the birds in the sky. They don't plant seeds and they don't bring in the harvest. They don't store things in barns, and your Father in heaven feeds them. Think how different you are from them. Can you add 15 inches to your height by worrying? And worry what to wear. Take a tip from the lilies in the countryside. They don't work and they don't weave. He goes on. He says, you know what? Look at all these situations. Look at the track record God has. Look at how God continues to take care of his creation. His track record is flawless. His ability is unquestioned. And we are under good management. Third, and I'll make quick work of this one, it's a good product. A good product is timely and timeless. A good product is timely and timeless. So what we want to know is the product of generosity. Is it something that's going to be perfect for the moment and perfect for every moment? And the thing I would say to you is that perhaps no place better in Scripture is this captured than when James, the brother, half-brother of Jesus, said that every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, comes down from above. It comes from God. Every good and perfect gift. Everything that is needed for the moment, every timely and timeless gift, everything that is needful is given to us by God. You see, it's a good product. It's under good management. And there's a promise of increased profit. This is a good investment. By every metric of investing, generosity is the most secure and profitable way to use our resources. So let's close by taking a look at what this new instinct then looks like. Moving from the human instinct of hoarding and keeping and saving and treasuring and finding security to the God-like driven generosity that is a good investment of the resources that he gives us. What does it look like to live this new instinct? Well, one thing is we're going to exchange the greed of the past for the generosity of today. We're going to change from wanting to keep to wanting to give. And we're going to demonstrate that by an understanding that the more we give to God, the more comfort and security he's going to provide for us. That there is a liberty that comes from relinquishing control and putting our trust in God. The things that we want to feel secure with can't be protected from the moth and the rust and the robbers and even our own mortality. But we can put that same trust in God and find the comfort and security that comes from putting our faith in him. There are moments in life, and I think we're in one, when it seems to make more logical sense to give in to greed. To give in to the hardship of the moment and to say, normally I want to be generous, but right now things are just different. Well, let's think about how this new instinct looks, and even the most difficult of times. And we have these admonitions from Paul as he talked about the church at Macedonia. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Let me tell you, my dear family, about the grace which God has given to the Macedonian churches. They have been sorely tested by suffering. But the abundance of grace which was given to them and the depths of poverty which they have endured, these have overflowed in a wealth of sincere generosity on their part. And I bear witness that of their own accord, up to their ability, and even beyond their ability, they begged us eagerly to let them have the privilege of sharing in the work of service for God's people. These were churches that were in destitute situations themselves, and yet when they heard about difficulties of others, they begged and pleaded, let us be a part. Let us be a part of the solution. Let us demonstrate the generosity that God shows to us. You see, that's the new instinct at work. That even in difficult times, and we are undeniably in difficult times, it looks at the needs of others and recognizes the opportunity that we have to make a difference for them. I think that's why Jesus said, you show me your treasure, and I'll show you your heart. You show me where you put your trust, and I'll show you what you really value. And that's where we have to move from wealth to worth. This same writer, in another just wonderful, amazing quote, has summed it all up in these two lines that I think are of such value. The lens of wealth is valuing what you have with you. The lens of worth is valuing who you have with you. Nobody can serve two masters, Jesus said. You can't serve God and money. You can't put both on the throne of your life. You're going to go for wealth or you're going to go for worth. We're all going to go to the instinct of our human selves and hoard and keep and save and put our trust in it. Or we're going to be transformed by Christ and move into the new realm of His calling, where we put our trust and our hope in Him. And we recognize that that which we have been given is for the purpose of giving to those who don't have. And even in the most difficult of situations, we're going to be people driven by generosity. You see, the old instincts are deeply hardwired, and the old ways of thinking are deeply ingrained. And yet the transformative power of Jesus Christ in our life is continually drawing us closer and closer to the people that He intends us to be, more like our Father. And may we see that most of all in how we look at those blessings that He has given us. Let's bow for a word of prayer as we close. Our Father in heaven, we thank You so much that we are blessed. And even in difficult times, we recognize that Your blessings are not short. They're not small. Your hand is not weak, and our opportunities are not few. And may we have a new view of our blessings so that we can be more like You are, as You make it rain on the fields of the just and the unjust. May we see our opportunity to bless all with no strings, with no preconceived notions and no requirements. Lord, as we recognize the fallacy of putting our trust in things below, may we more fully put our trust in You. And Lord, may we be those who make a difference in this community and this world by the generosity and love that we demonstrate. Help us to be more like You. Help us to gain Your new instincts. It's in Your Son's name that we pray. Amen.